It's e-commerce is a relatively new industry, but it wasn't in my house. My mother set up her first and only e-commerce business in 2004, still running today. That's kind of personalized baby gifts, Christmas gifts, wedding gifts, that kind of things. We grew up with e-commerce at the kitchen table, hearing about broken checkouts and bounce rates and conversion rates and all this kind of stuff. And for us, that was a very formative experience. But back in 2004, Shopify didn't exist. There was no apps. A lot of your job as an e-commerce business was convincing people that you weren't a scam. I set up my first e-commerce brand when I was 18, and really, really good experience.
Want to attract and convert more leads? Want to learn how digital PR, branding, and SEO can establish and build your brand identity? Welcome to the Market Movers Building Brands and Links with Linkify podcast. We answer these questions and help you ramp up your brand visibility and credibility. Let's cut through the noise and make your business the talk of the town. We're your hosts, Nick and Chris. Let's get this show on the road.
Welcome to the Market Movers podcast. Today's guest is Thomas Gleeson, StoreHero co-founder and ex-Shopify merchant success lead, who helps e-commerce brands grow profitably by focusing on contribution margin, LTV, and cash flow over vanity metrics. Welcome to the show, Thomas.
Thanks very much, Chris. Nick, really, really excited to be here today, and thanks very, very much for having me on.
Thomas, it's awesome to have you on. We're excited to talk about e-commerce marketing. To start, you mentioned before we hit record that you grew up with e-commerce. So maybe we could start there, talk about your background, how you've got to the point where you are now.
Yeah, sure. It's a funny one, really. E-commerce is a relatively new industry, but it wasn't in my house at home. My mother set up her first e-commerce business in 2004. Sorry, her first and only e-commerce business in 2004, still running today. That's kind of personalized baby gifts, Christmas gifts, wedding gifts, that kind of thing. So, to your point, we grew up with e-commerce at the kitchen table, hearing about broken checkouts and bounce rates and conversion rates and all this kind of stuff. And, for us, that was a very formative experience. You knew the pains, the trials and tribulations of running an e-commerce business from early on. And as we all know, there's plenty of problems with e-commerce today and challenges. But back in 2004, Shopify didn't exist. There was no app store. I think Google ads weren't even built at that point either. So while things you may think, the Helicon days of e-commerce was, why didn't we get started 20 years ago? There was certainly a lot of infrastructure problems and trust problems back then as well. Go back to the early 2000s, a lot of your job as an e-commerce business was convincing people that you weren't a scam because there was a lot of talk around, internet shopping not being safe and that kind of thing. But, for us, it was a tremendous experience. I set up my first e-commerce brand when I was 18, personalized kind of kids books, Christmas books, that kind of thing. And, really, really good experience. Never a brand I made loads of money from or anything like that. But for me, it taught me how to build a website, set up email marketing, run Facebook ads, design a website, that kind of thing. And it was an incredible experience. The challenge in my house, I suppose, was between my mom and my dad. So what I mean by that was, my mother built the business and ran the business for 10 years, from 2004 to probably 2015, 11 years, primarily and only using SEO marketing, which sounds like a pipe dream to anybody listening to this podcast today. And in 2015, 16, I discovered this thing called the Facebook Pixel. And it was amazing. You plug in first time, instead of just monitoring cost per click, I could now see this ROAS figure and, put one in, how many do you get out? And that was the first time we could see that. And the challenge was my dad. My dad is like an old school accountant, and he was like, "Well, you're now paying for all these sales that we used to get for free for SEO." And I was like, "Okay, yes, but the ROAS is really, really good." And he would kind of counter and say, "Look, this number means nothing to me. It doesn't take into account COGS. It's not taking into account that. You're also telling me Facebook and Google can claim the same sale. You can forget about spending any more money until you can give me a number that I can trust." Probably thought he was a bit of a dinosaur, to be completely honest with you. But the more I kind of tried to understand his point of view, I kind of thought he was pretty spot on, to be completely honest. So what that entailed was me building out a spreadsheet on a Monday every week to bring in Shopify information, marketing information, and financial information. So really what he wanted to see was, okay, you spent 20% more on ads this week because I actually don't care about your revenue. Did you generate more profit? And if you did that, you can have as much money as you want. But until you can show me that, we're turning off the ads. So that was really interesting for me. Around that time, going to work at Shopify directly, again, I was into Shopify, I suppose, with a head on my shoulders saying, I just want to go in here for a couple of years and figure out how an e-commerce business works. And what better way to do that than work at Shopify, where you're going to be speaking to founders of all kinds of businesses all over the world every day of the week. And, it did that. And it was incredible. Worked with all the biggest brands in Shopify Plus, and even, a really, really small cohort of huge brands in the UK, for the last probably 18 months of my journey there. left Shopify almost 3 years ago to set up StoreHero. So just to kind of give people a quick understanding, if you're not familiar, Chris, you did a great job of kind of painting the picture. So we help e-commerce businesses centralize e-com marketing and finance to give brand owners a better sense of their margins, unit economics, and profitability. So moving brands away from looking at revenue and ROAS every day, and first and foremost, measuring profitability and really using that as the North Star to drive forward.
Love it. Okay, so old school, got to be profitable. I love your dad
Yeah.
as well, just like stepping in and telling your mom, stop spending money on ads until we can.
What an education as well. Like,
Yeah.
think about how most people get into that. It's like trial and error. I mean, that had to have been so valuable, being able to go and say like, hey, is this a good idea? Does this work? Just to grow up learning all those things. I think that's amazing.
To me, though, the funny thing was that, I probably just thought that this was a my house it's problem, it was just like this was the dynamic in my house where, the finance guy was setting the budgets, but didn't understand marketing. And then you have the founder who's like a product person, marketing person, not really necessarily being a finance expert. But that kind of push and pull I found was actually playing out when I got into Shopify. It was actually playing out in like all the biggest businesses around the world. There's just like a huge mismatch between, if you think about finance people and marketers, they're usually very different people with very different interests, different friends, that kind of thing. And in a lot of instances, they actually just don't get on with each other. Very, very different personalities. So when you're trying to get those two people on the same page, it can be very, very difficult for them to almost develop a shared language that they can understand each other to drive forward.
And I imagine as well, like when your mom was started in 2004, it was, and with SEO as well, she had her hosting costs to produce content, maintain the website, and then she could see what her sales were. So actually to calculate that end profitability was a lot more of a simpler process and equation than it is once you have all these other things to account for. So I imagine you're inside the beast of the belly in Shopify. You could see firsthand the thing that led you to build what you've built. So what are some of these issues that are going on with those big brands in terms of not focusing on profitability?
If I even just take a step back for a second, like the biggest issue I have, and that's why I've got such conviction in it, was that there's such a huge industry-wide fascination with measuring business success on return on ad spend. And it's just so flawed. It's just so flawed. And if I was to even pick apart anything, that is probably one of the biggest problems I see with e-commerce businesses. And, I did it for years. I'm sure you guys did it for years. I think it's a byproduct of how efficient ad spend was 5 to 10 years ago, rather than a solid business metric to build for the future. And what I mean by that was ad spend was so efficient for so long that it was a fantastic metric. You just put more fuel into the fire. As long as this number stayed around there, everything worked. The dirty secret of a lot of the industry was that nobody really understood the mechanics of how it worked. It just did. But, as we all see, attribution issues have got a hell of a lot worse over the last couple of years. Product costs, inflation has driven the supply chain costs up. Operational expenses have also gone up with inflation, and just generally your internet rent, your Facebook tax, ad spend fees, whatever you want to call it, that's also got a lot more expensive as well. So you have margin compression happening at every stage of the business. So if that's happening and your margins are getting squeezed, the mechanism by which you determine success for a lot of businesses, like the paid media spend and the P&L is the heaviest line item of the whole business. So if you think about that individual who's tasked with deploying the capital from an ad spend perspective, they're essentially the biggest investor in the whole business. And if you're not quantifying that person's success in terms of how they spend that money in a way that makes sense to everybody in the business, you're building the business on shaky foundations. So what I'm trying to get people to understand is, if we're trying to build a tower, let's just make sure that the foundations are built in correctly, and we know what we're measuring, and there can be no ambiguity around it.
So what's a better metric to look at? Because I think companies they want to see that one number. It's like your role is this one number. And we still see a lot of companies, we'll talk to companies sometimes and they're like, all of our sales come from Facebook. So that's the only sales channel they have. So what would you say is a better metric to keep your eye on? Contribution margin
is the first one I would always look at. The reason for that is just to give anyone who's not familiar with the term a quick explainer or it's essentially your net revenue. So again, you're stripping out your taxes minus all of your COGS, minus all of your marketing spend. One big problem, I'll give you a quick example here. I spoke to an e-com business last week in the UK, and they have 81% product margin, right? So really, really good, really good margin.
Mm-hmm.
But when I plugged them into StoreHero and we looked at all of their actual costs, their actual gross profit was down to like 43 or 4% because they were giving out 20% discounts, free shipping, free returns, buy now, pay later solutions. And what that does is, it puts so much more increased pressure on your marketing to outperform because you have all these little paper cuts coming out of your margin that, yes, they're probably going to increase your conversion rate, but at what cost? For that business, we kind of we built out a forecast, and basically based on the 40% gross margin that they had, they could only spend 140K on marketing next year. But we worked on a solution where we're going to try and pare back some of these returns, pare back some of the free shipping, and do a small price increase with some discounts back. We were going to hopefully projecting to get that gross margin from 40% to 60%. Now, anybody listening today is thinking, well, what does that mean? Why is that important? I'll tell you what it meant. It meant that the allowable marketing budget went from 140K to 420 grand.
Wow.
Okay. So we haven't changed our top line revenue figure, the sales target that we're looking for. We haven't changed our profit target at the bottom. We're simply just looking at what that offer structure looks like. And again, coming up to Black Friday, the offer structure is absolutely everything for e-com brands. I would be very, very confident or just hopeful that brands just think about what you're trying to achieve, because increased profitability, increased revenue does not necessarily equal increased profitability. There is such a clear distinction and differentiation between the two. And if you're an e-commerce founder and you've tasked your e-com managers and your agencies with hitting a revenue figure first and foremost, and you've no real consideration for your bottom line profitability, what does that do? Put yourself in the shoes of an e-commerce manager who is, 5 days out from the end of the month, or 5 days out from the end of the quarter, or whatever it's going to be. And all you have to do is hit this revenue target and you're behind. Well, if we go on 30% site-wide sale and we pump Facebook ads to the last, you'll probably hit that revenue target. But you probably eroded all of the margin that the business was set up for in the first place as well. I think it's really, really important to A, get the offer structure right, and B, know what you're trying to increase, because revenue and profitability generally, there needs to be kind of more of a focus on one or the other.
So let's take Black Friday as an example, because this is like the holiday where everything is massively marked down. How do you figure out that offer? If you're looking at, we've got a revenue target, but we actually want to be profitable on this, how does that work for Black Friday?
I'll give you a really, really simple one, right? And I did this with a brand last week. So what we did was we pulled out the sales report last year from the Shopify store, from the 1st of November to the 7th of January. So that kind of, peak busy time period. And what we did was we looked at all of the top sellers from, 1 to 1,000, I think it was. And then we looked at the average order value within that. And I also then got them to turn on the gross margin column. Okay. And I'll tell you why that's important in a second. So what we were looking for was, their average order value is typically around £50. So what I was looking to try and find was there more expensive products in their catalog that maybe we didn't sell a whole lot of last year, but maybe we didn't put a lot of focus into them. So what we're trying to think is there products within your stack that, or your catalog, that maybe have a higher average order value than you typically have right now, but where you have really, really good gross margin? Because if you have very, very good gross margin, it just allows you to spend a lot more money to acquire the customer at a higher rate. What I would say to businesses is you're trying to create that offer structure to allow yourself to have a higher CAC. The game of e-commerce is not a game of trying to get your CAC on the floor. The guys who win understand how to build an offer structure that allows them to have a high CAC. Because if you can have a high CAC, say you have two businesses, business A and business B, and they relatively sell the same thing. If business A has a much higher allowable CAC than business B, business A is going to win that bidding war in Meta or Google every day of the week. So trying to think of how do we build that offer structure that bundles products together that people like, where we have decent offer structures that allow us to have a pretty high CAC. Not saying that you want to hit that CAC all the time, but at least that you have a bit of firepower, a bit of ammo, that as we're coming into the busiest holiday season of the year, that you can spend that bit more. So yeah, I think doing a good deep dive on your sales of last year, products that had decent average order value with decent margin, see the ones that maybe didn't sell well. Was that because we didn't put enough effort into them from a creative standpoint, from a merchandising standpoint, from a bundling standpoint? Is there opportunities buried within there as well? The other thing I would say to people is that from a discounting and an offer perspective, you don't need to copy everybody else. Okay. Like your customers probably have a fair idea who they're going to purchase from on Black Friday anyway. Like maybe your offer structure on the day, your discount, your heavy discount on that day, maybe isn't actually as much of a deciding factor as you think it might be. So what I would say to people is like test out just maybe some offers. They don't need to be site wide. Maybe it's a increase in your free shipping threshold. Maybe it's, another good one that we see often is like a free gift with purchase. So you're not actually discounting the main product at all, but you can see that you've loads of old stock that needs to be turned back into cash. If you have good margin on that stuff, can you just give it away as a free gift for purchase and hold on to the margin on the product that you actually want to sell? There can be loads of ways that we can increase the perceived value without necessarily, hemorrhaging ourselves from a margin perspective.
This is fascinating stuff. I'm intrigued that the larger e-commerce brands with much larger product ranges will have much more flexibility in order to absorb this data and then tweak things in order to like achieve the results you're talking about. What about e-commerce stores that have the much smaller or even just like one or two products, but they're going to have that, they need to be involved in Black Friday. Where is that wiggle room for them to like still maintain a margin but also drive the sales that they want?
The first thing I would say to people is like, get out an Excel sheet. And again, we have a calculator done for this, guys. I can send it to you. You can put it in the show notes afterwards. Actually look at what the offer structure looks like for you. So if it's like, I don't know, let's just pull one out of the sky, an apparel business that sells t-shirts. So, if you're planning to do a 3-for-2 offer this Black Friday, actually put in what the RRP looks like, what the new RRP with the discount is going to look like, what your COGS are. Is that person entitled to free shipping? If so, put it in as a cost. What's the transaction fee going to be? What's your return rate? And figure out what that break-even point ROAS is going to look like for you on that offer level. That is such a fundamentally primary thing that everybody should know going into Black Friday, because it's so paramount. But it would shock you the amount of brands that go in actually not knowing that number, and it's absolutely critical at that time of year.
So, do any companies come to mind in this space that have a really phenomenal offer structure? Like if you wanted to go out and study who does this well, I think in the marketing space, Russell Brunson comes to mind. What e-commerce companies could you go out and look at just to see like this is their offer structure that works really well?
I hate using them as an example because they're used in so many examples, but like Gymshark are a company that just understood their unit economics and their break-even points like back in 2015 when nobody was talking about this stuff. Gymshark are an incredible example of a brand that just, nail the offer structure. They get it really, really well. They do it exceptionally well. Another one that I would look at is a company here in the States called Grunz. It's a new kind of supplement business, kind of an athletic greens competitor. There's loads of them, to be honest with you. If you look at any of the big boys, they're usually doing a pretty good job on it. That being said, like a good job for them doesn't mean you copy them. If they're a bigger business, they probably have more margin flexibility than you are as well. There's a lot you can do. Your buyers are in market that day, that period at the time of the year. There's a lot you can do from a storytelling standpoint, from a nurturing standpoint, that will hopefully mean that you don't need to discount as much. But, that's another thing. Like, you don't need to copy directly, I suppose, what the bigger boys are doing. It's always worth taking note, get ideas, but, play your own game, because you could go broke by trying to copy somebody else as well.
I'm intrigued that you said earlier you'd be surprised how many brands don't have a hold of this information. So there's possibly people listening. They've maybe got an accountant, but they haven't got a full, wide view of all of this information. Maybe they're thinking now, shit, what am I going to do? How am I going to get a hold of these figures? Like, where is the problem, and how can these brands start today to get hold of that information in a meaningful way that they can then start analyzing and implementing offer structures that make sense for them and their business?
Sure. I mean, look, the very much rudimentary way of doing this is on a spreadsheet. Obviously, StoreHero does all of that for you, but you don't need it. Like first and foremost, if you wanted to just understand this, get into Shopify, pull out your raw numbers, be honest with yourself about your COGS, right? Yeah. That is something I would just have to stress so much. The amount of times the business comes into us and tells us they have 70, 80% gross margin, and by the time we factor in their discounts, that they've actually priced their VAT as part of their margin, which it isn't. They haven't priced in their free shipping that they give away, which is often a lot, the returns, transaction fees. That 70, 80% gross margin, that falls to 40, 50% sometimes. If you've built your break-even point ROAS, if you've built your offer structure, if you've built your allowable CAC, on the original 70%, and you hit those targets, you'll put yourself out of business straight away. So just make sure that you understand really what that true break-even point looks like. So get into Shopify, get your net sales figure, make sure your VAT is gone, price in all your actual shipping costs, including the free shipping. Do the same for your returns, look at your transaction fees, and get to understand what that break-even point ROAS looks like for you, because that is such a critical thing that everybody needs to know. And do the same thing for your offer structure, whatever types of offers that you're looking to run for Black Friday as well. Ultimately, the more margin that you can save, or the more, the impact on gross margin is enormous. The more gross margin that you have on every product going out the door, or every order going out the door, ultimately you have so much more money to spend to acquire customers. There's a lot of tactics that get implemented onto an Black Friday is almost the biggest culprit of this. There's a lot of tactics that get employed from, CRO people sometimes to just boost conversion rates, but you need to take it, a hardline view to understand, like, what's going to get me to that profitability number. Is it going to be these CRO hacks? And sometimes it is, but for that business, if we go back to the business I gave it originally, they wanted to hit, I think, 1.5 million next year. And with the 43% gross margin, they had 140K. Now, if we can strip back some of those conversion tactics and get it back to maybe 60%, they have now 420 grand to hit the exact same revenue figure. So you have to think, like, were those conversion tactics going to get them there? Or if we have almost tripled the marketing budget, is that going to get us there? Yeah, your conversion rate will probably drop, but if you've tripled the firepower from an ad spend perspective, it just means that you have so much more in your locker.
Yeah. Not including those numbers, or including VAT, not including returns, that feels like something, your broker is going to do when you're trying to sell the business. It's not what your internal team should be looking at when they're trying to decide if this is an offer that makes sense. So you've mentioned that Black Friday, a lot of people already know who they're going to buy from when that comes up. So a lot of that is storytelling. Maybe you don't need as deep of a discount as you think. But if you're looking at it as acquiring new customers, how do you balance that? If you've got your list, you want to sell to them, but you also want to attract those new people, maybe that's where you need the steeper discounts. Is there a way to think about the two different paths?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the one thing I would say on this before we even give the advice on the new customers is, in Shopify as well, you can see the customer cohorts kind of chart. Now, it's a messy looking triangle chart for anybody who hasn't seen it before. Spend 5 minutes, watch a YouTube video on how to read it correctly. Extremely powerful when you can wrap your head around it. It looks a bit mad the first time you kind of see it. But once you get that, why I bring that up is go back and have a look at November and December of last year, even relative to the rest of the year. What you're trying to understand is, okay, for new customers that we acquire, even just take it another month, October, for example. October, not a huge sale month. Those customers are probably going to be a little bit more loyal to you than the customers that shop with you in November and December. Often new customers that shop with you in November and December are people buying gifts for other people. They're not necessarily your customer. So when we're talking about new customer acquisition for BFCM, super, super important. But just to understand that those customers are, depending again on your offer structure, are typically not going to be the highest quality customers that you're going to get the rest of the year. Now, to your point, Nick, I think you're dead right. That time of the year, though, it is still worth giving an extra carrot to new customers. It could be, to your point, as a tier discount for newer customers. It could be a free gift for purchase for newer customers. You don't obviously want to exclude too much against your repeat customers because they're obviously the ones bringing the bread and butter. But, there is a lot you can do there, even just simple stuff from a Klaviyo standpoint with some of your email sign-up forms and that kind of thing. Some slightly increased discount. It doesn't need to be crazy. But I think there's an awful lot you can do with that for sure.
Really fascinating stuff, Thomas. I've really, really enjoyed this episode. As we come towards the end and we're starting to wrap up, from a consumer perspective, I thought it'd be interesting if you could just tell me what I should be looking out for where a deal isn't actually a good deal, because I've got money to spend coming this Black Friday. I need some new security cameras for my house and maybe a couple of other bits and bobs. But what should I be looking for that is a good offer and not a good offer from a consumer perspective?
ChatGPT.
Yeah.
The way things are going here, I know we touched on it briefly before the show, but how much of a role is that going to play this Black Friday? Who knows?
Yeah.
That'll be really interesting to see. Are you seeing that impact, the clients you work with? sales moving over to ChatGPT? What kind of concern is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an opportunity, first and foremost. I mean, I'm getting asked about it, every day of the week right now. And I definitely don't have all the answers either, but it is it's just so exciting to watch, It looks like Google SEO starting again, but on a new platform that is just moving at the pace that, about you guys, but I've never seen anything move at the pace that OpenAI is moving at this year. It's incredible. My brother actually has a tour guiding business in the west of Ireland, and I got a WhatsApp message from him last month, and he doesn't spend a whole lot of money on Google Ads, but he does spend money. He spent about like 2K a month basically on Google Ads. But last month, his ChatGPT traffic was more than his Google paid traffic on his website.
Wow.
And I was like, oh my God, that is absolutely insane. So, that's a microcosm of anything. I haven't dug into this too much for a lot of businesses, but I actually got him to send me the screenshot because I didn't believe him. But, that's where it's going. There's a lot of talk around how do you optimize for it directly. I think it's just honestly going back to old school, setting yourself up from an SEO perspective as best you can. If you're set up really, really well from an SEO perspective, I think that's what ultimately is going to start getting pulled into ChatGPT. And let's see where that goes, because it's a crazy kind of 12 months ahead, I think.
Yeah, I was doing a couple searches just to see before this talk, and all of the products it recommended came from smaller retailers. I'm in Portugal, so my results could be different than yours. But nothing was Amazon, nothing was Decathlon, nothing was these big brands here. It was all smaller retailers. So there's certainly a lot of opportunity there to like figure it out, start getting recommended. It could be a great sales channel.
Thomas, this has been awesome. We'll try and I'll get the link from you from the spreadsheet that you said we could make available in the show notes. But if people want to reach out to you, find out more about your tool, where can they track you down?
Sure. You can get me on LinkedIn at Thomas Gleeson, or you can head over to our website, StoreHero.ai.
Okay, awesome. Well, thanks for being such a great guest, and have a good Black Friday for all your clients. Hope everything goes great. Cheers, Thomas.
Thanks very much, guys. Really, really enjoyed the chat, and looking forward to catching up again soon.
Cheers. Thanks, Thomas.